It's now my great pleasure to welcome our first keynote speaker, Senator Christine Milne. Christine Milne, leader of the Australian Greens and a senator for Tasmania, is this year marking 25 years in politics. Christine grew up on a dairy farm in Tasmania and was arrested and jailed during the campaign to save the Franklin River in 1983. Following her successful campaign to stop the native forest-based Wesley Vale pulp mill in the late 1980s, she was elected to the Parliament of Tasmania in 1989. Christine became the first woman to lead a Tasmanian political party in 1993 and led the Tasmanian Greens as they held balance of power from 1996 to 1998. She pioneered the idea of multi-party power-sharing politics in Australia and is committed to developing ethically driven leadership, and I think that she's demonstrated that in more than a number of ways. Christine entered federal politics in 2004 and became leader of the Australian Greens in 2012, again holding the balance of power, this time in the Senate. Christine's deep policy knowledge about climate change and her unparalleled experience with power-sharing minority governments secured an agreement to introduce an emissions trading scheme in Australia, subsequent to the establishment of the Multi-Party Climate Change Committee. As lead negotiator for the Greens on climate policy, Christine achieved through that committee not only the emissions trading scheme, but the Biodiversity Fund, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and $10 billion for the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. Christine intends to continue standing up to the Conservative Abbott government, fighting for a clean economy, to protect the natural environment, caring for refugees, and to be a voice for a more equal community. Please welcome Senator Christine Milne to the stage.
Well, thank you very much for that lovely welcome. Look, I'd like to start by acknowledging the Milne people, the traditional owners of the land, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I apologise for not being able to be with you yesterday, but as you would be aware, I went to Sydney for the memorial service of Gough Whitlam. And on the way back on the plane, I started thinking a bit more deeply about this conference and my own path on the road to ecological sustainability. And I realised how lucky I was to be a 19-year-old second-year arts student at the University of Tasmania in 1972. Gough Whitlam didn't exist in a vacuum. His ideas were a reflection of his time, and his election year, 1972, as Prime Minister, was the year of the first United Nations Conference on the Human Environment held in Stockholm. And prior to that, that conference was in June in 72, but in March of that year, the world's first Green Party, the United Tasmania Group, was formed here in Hobart at the Town Hall. And I do acknowledge, with so many New Zealanders present, it was only a short time afterwards that the Values Party was set up in New Zealand. So what is really interesting, and it's always been evident to me in politics as any other form of life, change never comes from the centre. It always comes from the periphery. And here we had Stockholm leading in thinking in terms of ecological systems thinking, and here in the Southern Hemisphere, we had Tasmania and New Zealand translating that ecological values into a political framework. That's something that I think we can really be proud of. The founder of the United Tasmania Group was Dick Jones. He was a biologist, and he embraced ecology emphatically, passionately. He taught at the University of Tasmania and persuaded the Tasmanian University to set up its first ever Department of Environmental Studies. His vision was that this department would become the hub of the whole life of the university, that would give effect to the idea of ecology, interactive systems between people and nature. And his ideas were, in fact, given effect not only by his teaching, but by life on the campus and the organising of marches and the campaign to save Lake Pedder. Ecology was taught in the university. It was put into practice through the formation of the United Tasmania Group as a community-based political party with participatory democracy, ecology, social justice, peace and non-violence at its heart. But it was operationalised also by the marches and the campaign on the campus. He would have loved the idea that a movement and organisation for sustainability on campuses would eventually evolve. Thinking about that time and the fact that the Global Greens Party emerged from this university in this state, and that now it's a worldwide political movement, it really made me reflect on the role of universities in challenging values and worldviews. It may be the only place and the only time where any individual actually has their values challenged. And that is why it is so important that we stick steadfastly, tenaciously to the view that anyone from anywhere ought to be able to access tertiary education, a university education, and that it should not depend on how much money they have or what their background is. We must stick with that principle. It was reinforced yesterday at the Whitlam Memorial Service, reminding ourselves of the fact that he brought in free university education. But at this time, thinking about the absolute need to change the values system of humanity if we're actually going to survive in an age where we are on track for 4 degrees of warming, then access to the institutions which challenge values and worldviews is absolutely critical. But I do worry that the way universities are now organised and the fact that so many people have to work 1 or 2 jobs as well as access their university education means that they don't actually engage in the life of the campus, that their experience of university is only in the subject areas or the course that they're particularly doing. They don't actually get into the headspace of the university as a thought leader, as a challenger of values. I mean, my courses at the University of Tasmania in an arts degree in the 70s, I can tell you, did not focus on sustainability. What got me involved, as I said, was this incredible life on the campus around the excitement that was going on around the world in the United Nations, in the United Tasmania Group, in the marches on Pedder and so. If you're at university now and you're involved in 2 jobs and just getting there or doing things online, how are you going to engage in those thought practices? And I think that's a challenge for all of us in terms of embedding sustainability in universities and in curriculum. What you are doing in embedding it on the life of the campus is absolutely critical to that. As Thoreau said, "The surface of the earth is soft and impressive by the feet of men, and so with the patterns which the mind travels. How worn and dusty must be the highways of the world, how deep the ruts of tradition and conformity." So universities need 2 things, a 2-pronged approach. One is the minds and values, and the other is practice. Now, in the religious context, and I was embedded in a Catholic boarding school for 6 years, so I can tell you this from experience. In religious context, faith and hope are operationalised by charity. So it's in doing the active work of charity that you operationalise the philosophical view of a religion. Well, it's the same thing in the ecological sense. The understanding how everything is interconnected has to be operationalised too. And that is what you are doing every day in your work on embedding sustainability in courses, as say La Trobe Uni has done with all its undergraduate courses, but with all of you working to operationalise ecological sustainability and systems thinking, whether you're doing it in energy efficiency, whether you're doing it in renewable energy, whether you're doing it in waste streams in the university, whether you're doing it in the transport systems of the university, or green design in the buildings on the university, the planning of the university and the student accommodation. All of those things are operationalising sustainability, and it's impossible to overestimate the importance of universities in helping our world understand and overcome the monumental challenge of global warming. There's barely a single aspect of preparing for the climate challenge that universities do not contribute to, and it's something about which you should all be really proud. Our climatologists are tracking the movement in greenhouse gas concentrations in our oceans and atmosphere and anticipating the likely trajectories our planet is on. We know, as I've said, 4 degrees of warming. We've just had the latest IPCC report. We know we've run out of time. It's a fact, we have run out of time. There can be no more delay in actually embedding sustainability. Our biologists, botanists, zoologists are studying the changes in ecosystems and species, and the agricultural scientists are estimating the expected decline in productivity and yields and trying to discover ways to overcome feeding a growing population with shrinking areas of food-producing land. Our engineers are designing and building the infrastructure we need to adapt to more frequent and extreme weather events. And our epidemiologists and statisticians and population health experts are warning of the huge public health challenges that lay around the corner. Even the defence academies, even the Pentagon is talking about the impacts of global warming and global security and what it means for defence forces. Our economists are explaining the important opportunities and competitive advantage that's now being lost, particularly under the government here in Australia, and they're telling us how the costs of doing nothing will far exceed taking early action and transitioning our economy. And that is a fact that we need to acknowledge and see just how expensive inaction is, and we need to embed that in the minds of Vice-Chancellors as well. Our earth and physical scientists are at the forefront of delivering smarter and more efficient ways of creating and using energy, as well as leading the breakthroughs in clean technology that will set us up in this century. Our architects and planners are rolling out green design of buildings, of spaces, of urban design. Our artists and philosophers and social scientists are confronting the ruts of our minds and working on how to overcome the clash between the information we are given and the values that we hold. And I've spoken to several leading scientists in the climate field. Graham Pearson, one who's formerly of CSIRO, one of our leading scientists, and he said, you know, I think where we went wrong was we spent all our time on the science of global warming because we thought if we gave people the information, they would just get it. What we now need desperately is the social scientists. We need to understand from psychologists, psychiatrists, the social scientists, why aren't people responding to the information? What is the blockage? How are the values repudiating the knowledge? These are the values, these are the roles in universities. Our business graduates are identifying the risks of changing markets and what that will mean for our economy and our future. And they will no doubt be reading the writing on the wall that the fossil fuel industry's days are numbered by 2100, if not sooner, and your job and my job is to make sure it's very much sooner. Meanwhile, teaching graduates are furnishing the next generation's minds with the importance of sustainable living and nurturing this precious world on which we live. That notional idea that you simply can't have a healthy society unless it is sustained by a healthy planet. And I take the point that was made here just a little bit earlier in the opening remarks with regard to who drives the curriculum. And that is really important in the current discussion of what are people going to be teaching, both in schools and in universities as we face the climate crisis, and who controls that. So without our universities, a very difficult task would almost be impossible. But the question I pose to you is, are we doing as well as we might? Are students in our tertiary institutions joining the dots and moving to whole systems thinking? Is it still an academic exercise in the subject area in which they are based, divorced from the way people live? Do students step onto or into a campus, physically or virtually, and know that they are being invited to be part of an institution committed to sustaining the life support systems of the planet, and that when they leave the campus or log off, that they are inspired to make that their lifestyle and their work? That is the challenge for us. Not only do universities contribute in the people, ideas and the creations they produce, but they also contribute in the way they run their organisations. After all, universities have to keep a very close eye on their profit and loss statements. They have to make investments and prepare for the future just like any other business. And what we're now seeing is that's both good and bad. It's good in terms of the work that you're doing. It's bad in terms of who owns the research, who sponsors the research. Is it pure? Is it applied? Who owns the chairs? Who owns the buildings with the big name on the side? These issues are quite critical. But we are seeing universities in Australia and in New Zealand investing, and around the world for that matter, in clean technologies, and they are creating them and employing them. And it is exciting to see universities invest in energy efficiency measures because it is lowering operating costs and it makes pure commercial and ecological sense. But why aren't we seeing more universities at the forefront of divesting their funds from fossil fuel industries? Because you know better than most that the high level of risk associated with harmful and increasingly uncompetitive products. Herein lies the conflict with ethics versus neoliberal economics. We've got ANU, we've got the University of Sydney, we've got Victoria University, I understand, in New Zealand has just decided to go with the divestment plan. We've got Glasgow and Stanford around the world. And yesterday I was very proud of UTAS students holding their demonstration in regard to divestment at this university. With the University of Adelaide, the very conflict that I just mentioned was a case in point. ANU has divested from Santos. Santos is the biggest company in South Australia, has its own building, research facilities, a whole range of support for Adelaide University. When Adelaide University students had a divestment meeting, they were condemned as being anti-South Australian, anti-jobs, anti-the university, anti-investment, and therein lies the challenge. The question is, how attractive will a university be to a student if it doesn't walk the talk of sustainability? Is it authentic? And I guess that's where the issue of transparency comes in. Universities are going to have to say very clearly who sponsors their research, who pays for the chair, what the rules are in relation to research and research funding. At least that will be a start of actually making people understand those connections. But this room is a testament to the commitment of universities to the sustainable future that we all want, and almost all of you are employed exclusively to inform your institutions of how to reduce your carbon footprint, how the university can position itself for the future, and to relay that message to senior management up to vice-chancellors. And I really commend you for that action. It's courageous, it's hard, it's particularly so now in the face of all the cutbacks. So I just wanted to just mention quickly how much greater the challenge is going to be in the next few years, because we have here in Australia a government which has no intention of embracing the realities of the science of global warming. We have, just as you would be aware, seen a direct action plan passed that will not even achieve a 5% emission reduction goal, let alone the 40 to 60% that we need to reduce emissions by 2030 if we've got any hope, that's in the Australian context, if we've got any hope of getting on a trajectory to net carbon zero out to 2050. So we are going to see taxpayers' money just being used to funnel money to pay the polluters rather than the polluters pay us. And we are going to see a safeguard mechanism set, which will be totally ineffective. And the reason for that is that the big miners will be negotiating, the big polluters will be negotiating their own baselines, and that means that they'll be set so high they will never come into effect. And what we will see now is the big polluters in Australia actually ramping up their emissions in the next couple of years, so that when they will then do that as their baseline, so that when the baseline comes in, they will never ever exceed it. A baseline that was effective would be a carbon tax, not an emissions trading scheme, but a carbon tax, and this government would never stand for that. But what you have to be worried about is the attack that's going to come onto universities. Any university that takes a lead in sustainability will be seen as an enemy of the current administration in Australia. That is the fact. And so it's going to take a lot of courage. It's going to take a lot of hard work to take this up to Vice-Chancellors in the next few years, who are going to have one eye on how are they going to maintain their funding from a hostile federal government if on their campuses people are actually promoting a philosophical view contrary to that of the government. And one of the examples which you may not have picked up yet, in the carbon farming initiative, I had put into that initiative in the integrity standards that the methodologies developed had to be based on peer-reviewed science. They are the words were in there, peer-reviewed science. What was passed last week by the Abbott government and supported by the Palmer United Party was that the policy no longer has to be based on peer-reviewed science. They simply have to be clear and compelling evidence that emissions reductions will occur. And that is to take out the rigour in the methodologies. So that is what you in universities are going to be faced with. But what I want to go on to do is congratulate you on the work that I know that you're doing, and to try and give you the confidence to speak out without fear or favour in terms of what you know to be right and what you know you can do on your campuses to link the values, to link the teaching, to link the actual action. So, we've seen the budget cut $500 million from the Australian Research Council, CSIRO and other programs. We've seen $717 million taken out of the Renewable Energy Agency. We've seen the Higher Education Reform Bill proposing the cuts across universities, and of course with the deregulation and fee increases, it's 101 to tell you that if that occurs, we're going to see students, a less number of students in some of the fields where we need them most. But there are exciting examples across our universities here in Australia to demonstrate what you can do. As they say, when the going gets tough, then the tough get going. So in terms of your work, starting here with the University of Tasmania, it's driven innovation, education and research, and particularly in this hub on the Antarctic and Southern Ocean. I couldn't be more proud of the fact that at last Tasmania has recognised its physical location and proximity to Antarctica is a massive strength, and the build-up of the science hub here in Tasmania is a matter not only of national but global pride for us, that we have so many scientists, so many lead authors in the IPCC working here in Hobart, and of course the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies is a real showcase. On installing renewables, the University of Queensland is doing exciting things. Across 4 buildings, they've installed a 1.22 megawatt solar array, and they've also gone into partnership with Australian company Redflow to install battery storage technology to make sure that that storage is there. And I just want to tell you a little story quickly about storage. I was doing some research on this, and this is what you'll be up against. Some of our best and brightest minds are not engaged with sustainability. In fact, they use their best and brightest minds to undermine sustainability and go and work for PR companies, the same PR companies that kept tobacco going for a very long time, the same PR companies that are going to take fossil fuel industries longer than they need, Burson Marsteller being a case in point. And they've come up with this idea of how do you promote coal in the face of the step-changing technology that is battery technology. And they've come up with this idea, which you will love. Coal produces energy fresh and daily. Batteries, stored and stale. Now, who would want a stored and stale electron driving their university when you could have a fresh and daily produced electron stream out of a coal-fired power station? And I think the point was made here by David Orr, or at least I didn't hear him speak, but he has said this before, if not here, that it is the best and brightest minds on the planet that are doing an awful lot of damage to the planet. Not everyone who gets an education shares the values that we need in terms of sustainability, and we are going to see this full on now in the challenge on climate, just as we saw it in the challenge on tobacco. I just wanted to go on and talk about Monash. They're purchasing 15% of electricity under green power contracts. They've installed solar panels across 5 campuses, and they've been a powerhouse in advancing PV and renewable energy technologies, and as have indeed ANU, as have University of New South Wales, quite a number of them. And when I went to the solar thermal plant in Spain, which is a fabulous plant with molten salt storage, I walked in the door and the first person I saw was a guy from Newcastle, a graduate of an Australian university, snapped up by a Spanish company, because our best and brightest are very welcome all over the world, and that's why I keep saying this government is such a huge opportunity cost to this country, because we are going to see solar engineers, the technologists, everyone going up and leaving the country. Great for the planet. It doesn't really matter where on the planet they're doing it, so long as they're doing it, but it's bad for Australia if we lose them overseas. For many new buildings, universities such as UTAS, University of Adelaide, Victoria University, Monash, Melbourne, Griffiths, they're all constructing Green Star buildings. RMIT has got its Sustainable Urban Precincts program, which is taking that commitment to green urban design to the next level. It's a $98 million program that will cut the university's emission levels by 30,000 tonnes and reduce its water use by 68 million litres. And that is really a wonderful type of innovation, and I do note that they are shortlisted in the Green Gown Awards. Charles Sturt University's water use has already declined by 40% since 2006, and there's now 300 million more litres of water in the surrounding river system because of their efforts. They and Edith Cowan have also transformed their campuses with biodiversity areas, not only providing habitat, but educating visitors with information on the variety of flora and fauna in the southwest of Western Australia. Swinburne recently released its first sustainability report, using the Global Reporting Index, a very stringent accounting standard that assesses environmental and sustainability measures. On waste management, the University of the Sunshine Coast has successfully implemented an integrated waste management system to its campus by introducing its on-site composting apparatus. First of its kind, it's been designed using an automated aerobic system to process organic matter. And again at UTAS, they're leading the way with a sustainable transport strategy, and they too are a finalist. These Green Gown Awards really are very exciting. I'm looking forward to being there tonight to be part of those, because it's great to get that recognition that so many people around Australia and New Zealand and in the UK and in Europe are now moving to recognise the work people are doing to operationalise the philosophical commit to ecological sustainability into the life and being of universities. So I would like to conclude, because I'd like to think if there are any questions you may want to ask. I'd just like to conclude by saying, never ever give up. It is going to be a very difficult period in Australia in the next few years, and we are facing that in the federal parliament. You will be facing that on campuses with cutbacks in funding, arguing for sustainability measures on campus. Is going to be tough going in the face of vice-chancellors turning around and finance committees turning around just saying, look, we simply can't do it. And the answer to that is you simply can't afford not to do it. And we have to really get that message out there loud and clear. If we're going to get to the systems thinking that is ecological sustainability, it has to be in the life of the mind and the body, the life of the daily experience of people engaged with universities. So I want to thank you all for the work that you're doing. It is appreciated. We see it in the Federal Parliament. I look around and I'm inspired by it, because I can tell you, sometimes you have to actually think about ecological sustainability, not only in terms of the interaction of ecosystems, but also the interaction of society with ecosystems and within societies. People are going to feel isolated in taking up the challenge wherever they are, because there'll be a small group of people in a university with competing priorities. Just remember, it is small groups of people linked together across universities in Australia, across universities in New Zealand, in the UK, in Europe. We are a small group of people, but we will win ultimately because A, we have to. The scientific and clear survival of the planet depends on it. But we will also win because for us this is not an academic exercise. This is about passion and knowledge and the future and intergenerational equity, and we are all committed to it. And it's only ever been, as Margaret Mead said, small groups of committed people have ever changed the world. That is what you're doing. Thank you very much.